Our subject predicted her death in eerie detail. This story is from my podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire, as told by our caller, Sean from Maryland. I think every family has a story that becomes a part of its lore. This is ours. It gets told and retold, but it stayed the same since I was a little boy. When I was young, my great-aunt Anita was still alive, and I remember her. She was quite the character, and she lived on the outskirts of Huntington, West Virginia, which is my hometown. Now, great-aunt Anita was a self-taught polymath. She could do a little of everything and do it well. She was an herbalist, linguist, calligrapher, artist, and musician. She played the violin and the piano. You could really say she was one of a kind. Now, towards the last few years of her life, she made her living as both an herbalist and as a piano teacher. She would sit in her front parlor, as she called it, and wait for her scholars, as she called them, to arrive for their music lessons. Now, Anita was in her late 80s and lived by herself. Different relatives would take turns coming over to check in on her. So another aunt of mine came over one day to visit. It's not a real name, but we'll call her Aunt Nancy for the purposes of this story. Now, great-aunt Anita was chipper and upbeat as usual. She told Aunt Nancy very matter-of-factly over old-fashioned tea that she dreamed about her last day on Earth, and it was coming very soon. Aunt Nancy was taken aback, and she pressed my Aunt Anita for details. Anita said that she had a dream the night before that she was sitting in her rocking chair. She had her quilt over her knees to help her keep warm, and while she was waiting for one of her piano scholars, something very strange happened. In the dream, the ceiling and the roof over her head faded away. Two angels came down from the sky, picked Anita up in her rocking chair, and carried her up to heaven. Now, she said that this prophecy of sorts was actually going to be fulfilled at 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the following Wednesday. Now, needless to say, Aunt Nancy was shocked. I mean, it's quite a thing to say somebody had a strange dream, but to say that it's going to kill you at 2 o'clock the following Wednesday, well, it's something different. Now, my mom used to say there are many ways to spread the word. Telegraph, telephone, tell an aunt. So this revelation of Anita's made its way from one end of the family to the other. Everyone was pretty concerned. Quite a few family members began checking in on Aunt Anita, asking if she was okay. And she would just wave them off and say, "I'm okay, everything's fine, everything's good." She wasn't the slightest bit concerned, so everybody calmed down, and nobody thought much more of it. That is, until the following Wednesday. Aunt Nancy and my mom went over to check on Anita. One of her scholars had shown up and found that great-aunt Anita had fallen asleep in her rocking chair and just never woke up. She'd just gone to sleep, and that was that. You may have guessed it, but the time when Aunt Anita was found dead, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just as she had predicted. Well, I believe some people are tuned in, and they have a way of knowing things. Aunt Anita was one of those people. She was always known in the family as the Fae. She'd always been independent, gone her own way, and done her own thing. She was very confident in her eccentricities. There is a portrait of Anita in my grandmother's house, and you can see that spirit in that picture. It's really remarkable. Now, I've always found this story so comforting, mainly since it's never changed, and the key point is always how Anita was not concerned about her impending death in the least. And when they found her, she had this very contented little smile on her face with her hands folded in her lap. And I think if you have to go, that's a pretty good way to make your exit. Aunt Anita went out in style, and that was from Sean in Maryland. I hope that you'll like, subscribe, and check out these other spooky videos. Stay spooky.